haven't seen each other for 20 years.
Well, you know, there was all those rumors about our breaking up, and then when I started the show and you weren't here, I believed it.
They keep giving it to me. I keep fooling the people.
In his final years, the King of Cool became a man consumed by bitterness. Once Hollywood's most effortless entertainer, Dean Martin spent his last decade revealing shocking truths about the people who had betrayed him.
Unless I knew there was somebody in the audience with a gun that was going to shoot me, then I'd be nervous. But why should I be nervous?
From Jerry Lewis to Frank Sinatra, from studio executives to family members, the man who once charmed America with his laid-back persona died alone on Christmas Day 1995, having systematically burned bridges with almost everyone who had once called him friend.
You're just too marvelous for words. Not yet.
This is the story of how the coolest man in Hollywood became its loneliest exile. In the summer of 1966, Dean Martin stood at the absolute pinnacle of American entertainment. The Sands Hotel and Casino in Las Vegas blazed with his name in lights. While inside the Coppa Room, a packed house of high rollers and celebrities waited breathlessly for the man they called the King of Cool to take the stage. At 49, Martin possessed something that money couldn't buy and talent alone couldn't create, an effortless magnetism that made everyone in his presence feel like they were part of something special. The numbers alone told the story of his dominance. The Dean Martin Show on NBC was pulling in 50 million viewers every Thursday night, making it one of the most watched programs on television.
Yep, I'm Dean Martin, and for the next hour, we'll be flying at an altitude of 32,000 feet.
His recording contract with Reprise Records, Frank Sinatra's label, was worth millions and had produced a string of hits including Everybody Loves Somebody, which had knocked the Beatles off the #1 spot in 1964. His movie career was equally spectacular, with recent successes like The Sons of Katie Elder and the Matt Helms spy films proving he could carry a picture without Jerry Lewis. But it was in Las Vegas where Dean Martin truly reigned supreme. The Rat Pack, Martin, Sinatra, Sammy Davis Jr., Peter Lawford, and Joey Bishop, had transformed the desert city into their personal playground. Their legendary shows at the Sands were equal parts concert and comedy routine, with the five friends drinking, joking, and performing with a casual brilliance that seemed almost too good to be real. Audiences never knew who might show up on any given night, creating an atmosphere of excitement that kept the casino floor packed until dawn. Martin's appeal transcended traditional entertainment boundaries. Men wanted to be him, cool, confident, seemingly unaffected by the pressures that crushed lesser mortals. Women wanted to be with him, drawn to his casual masculinity and the hint of danger that lurked beneath his smooth exterior. He embodied a very specific American fantasy, the successful man who never appeared to be trying too hard, who could sing a love song, crack a joke, and make a martini with equal skill. His personal life seemed equally charmed. Married to former model John Beager since 1949, Martin was the father of 7 children and appeared to have successfully balanced the demands of superstardom with family responsibilities. His Beverly Hills home was a gathering place for Hollywood's elite, while his growing real estate portfolio included properties in multiple states and a working ranch where he bred horses and entertained friends. The Rat Pack's influence extended far beyond entertainment. They were cultural kingmakers, their endorsement capable of launching careers or ending them. When they supported John F. Kennedy's presidential campaign in 1960, they brought glamour and star power to politics in ways that had never been seen before. Martin's own political connections ran deep, with friendships that spanned both parties and included some of the most powerful men in America. What made Martin particularly magnetic was his apparent indifference to his own success. While other stars seemed desperate for approval and validation, Martin projected an air of bemused detachment, as if he couldn't quite believe people were paying him millions of dollars to do things that came so naturally. This quality, what would later be called sprezzatura, the art of making the difficult look effortless, became his signature and set him apart from every other entertainer of his generation. His legendary drinking persona, while largely fabricated for television, added to his mystique. Audiences loved the idea of a man so naturally talented that he could perform brilliantly while apparently intoxicated. The reality was that Martin was a consummate professional who rarely drank during performances, but the the image served his purposes perfectly, reinforcing the notion that he was somehow above the ordinary rules that governed other people. Critics praised his understated style and natural comic timing. Unlike comedians who worked hard for laughs, Martin's humor seemed to flow from his personality, creating moments of genuine warmth and connection with his audience. His singing voice, while not technically perfect, possessed an emotional authenticity that made every song feel like a personal conversation. By 1966, Dean Martin had achieved something that few entertainers ever manage. He had become not just a star, but a cultural institution. His success seemed unshakable, his future unlimited. The idea that within 30 years he would die alone, estranged from many of his closest friends and colleagues, would have been unthinkable to anyone watching him command that stage in Las Vegas, bathed in spotlights and sustained by the adoration of millions. Beneath Dean Martin's success, the first hairline fractures were beginning to appear in the carefully constructed facade of his perfect life. While audiences saw only the effortless charm and casual confidence, those who worked closely with Martin were starting to notice troubling signs of the control and perfectionism that would eventually poison his most important relationships. The most visible crack was his deteriorating partnership with Jerry Lewis, the manic comedian who had helped make him a star in the late 1940s. What had once been a natural, almost telepathic collaboration had devolved into a series of increasingly bitter professional disagreements. Martin felt trapped in the role of straight man, forced to watch Lewis dominate their films and live performances while he was relegated to the background, singing a song or two before setting up Lewis for another comedy routine. The Martin and Lewis partnership had generated over $400 million in contracts and commitments, making them the highest paid act in show business. But money couldn't heal the fundamental creative differences that were tearing them apart. Lewis, influenced by critics and industry insiders who suggested he could be the next Charlie Chaplin, began pushing for more artistic control over their projects. He wanted to direct, write, and shape their films according to his increasingly grandiose vision of himself as a serious filmmaker and comic genius. Martin, meanwhile, felt diminished by Lewis's growing ego and demands. He had signed up to be part of a comedy team, not to serve as a supporting player in Jerry Lewis productions. The inequality became particularly apparent during their live performances, where Lewis would often extend his comedy routines far beyond what had been rehearsed, leaving Martin standing awkwardly on stage waiting for his turn to sing. Audiences came to expect Jerry Lewis antics, not Dean Martin music, and Martin knew it. Their personal relationship began to suffer as well. Lewis, naturally neurotic and insecure, required constant validation and reassurance from those around him. Martin, by contrast, preferred to keep his emotional distance, maintaining the cool persona that had become his trademark even in private moments. This fundamental incompatibility created tension that gradually infected every aspect of their professional partnership. Behind the scenes, their production team was forced to navigate the increasingly hostile dynamic between the two stars. Directors and writers found themselves caught in the middle, trying to satisfy Lewis's artistic pretensions while managing Martin's growing resentment. The atmosphere on their film sets became noticeably strained, with long periods of silence between takes and little of the easy camaraderie that had once characterized their work together. Martin's frustration extended beyond his partnership with Lewis to encompass broader issues with the entertainment industry itself. He was beginning to chafe against the expectations and limitations that came with stardom, particularly the constant pressure to maintain his public image. The easygoing, slightly drunk persona that audiences loved was becoming a prison, forcing him to suppress his natural intelligence and complexity in favor of a simplified, marketable version of himself. His perfectionism, which had always been hidden beneath his casual exterior, began to manifest in more obvious ways. Martin would spend hours preparing for performances that he wanted to appear spontaneous, memorizing every gesture and inflection until they seemed natural. This contradiction, working incredibly hard to seem effortless, created internal tension that began to affect his relationships with directors, producers, and fellow performers. The Rat Pack dynamic, while still profitable and popular with audiences, was also showing signs of strain. Frank Sinatra's controlling personality, which had initially been balanced by Martin's laid-back approach, was beginning to grate on the other members of the group. Sinatra's demands for absolute loyalty and his tendency to cut off friends who displeased him created an atmosphere of anxiety that contrasted sharply with the carefree image they projected on stage. Martin's marriage to Jeanne, while stable in public, was facing private challenges as well. The demands of his career required extensive travel and late-night work schedules that put strain on their family life. Jean's complaints about his absence from important family events would later become a source of ongoing conflict, though for now they remained hidden from public view. Most troubling of all was Martin's growing awareness that his success depended on maintaining relationships and personas that were beginning to feel false and constraining. The very qualities that had made him famous, his relaxed attitude, his apparent indifference to success, his easy charm, were becoming harder to sustain as the pressures of stardom mounted. The explosion came in 1956, during the filming of what would be Martin and Lewis's final movie together, the appropriately titled Hollywood or Bust.
Anita! That's Anita! She fell in! I'm gonna go in and save her! I can't swim, but we'll both die together!
What had begun as creative differences had escalated into personal warfare, with both men barely able to remain civil in each other's presence. The breaking point arrived when Martin, finally exhausted by years of playing second fiddle to Lewis's increasingly manic ego, delivered a verbal assault that would end their partnership forever. Martin looked his former partner in the eye and told him that he was nothing more than a financial commodity to him, his famous cool finally cracking to reveal the contempt that had been building for years. It was a moment of such vicious honesty that even the hardened Hollywood crew members present were shocked into silence. Lewis, who had always believed that his charm and talent could smooth over any disagreement, was devastated by the naked hostility in his partner's voice. The immediate aftermath was equally brutal. Director Frank Sinatra found himself caught in the crossfire as both men refused to communicate directly with each other, forcing him to serve as an intermediary for even the most basic professional interactions. Lewis later admitted that he wouldn't tell Martin what he thought of him, so their director took all the blame and frustration. The tension was so thick that crew members began taking sides, creating factions that made normal film production nearly impossible. Their final contractual obligation, a farewell engagement at the Copacabana in New York, became a funeral for their partnership. On July 25, 1956, exactly 10 years to the day after their first performance together, Martin and Lewis walked off the Copa stage for the last time, exiting in opposite directions without a word or glance between them. The audience, sensing something momentous, but not understanding its full significance, gave them a standing ovation that neither man acknowledged. The breakup sent shock waves through the entertainment industry. Martin and Lewis had been more than just a successful comedy team. They had been a cultural phenomenon, beloved by audiences and generating unprecedented profits for their studios and venues. The idea that they would voluntarily destroy such a lucrative partnership seemed incomprehensible to industry executives and fans alike. But for Martin, the split represented liberation from what had become an intolerable situation. He was tired of being the handsome straight man to Lewis's increasingly self-indulgent comic routines. He was exhausted by Lewis's need for constant validation and his tendency to rewrite scripts and extend performances to showcase his own talents at Martin's expense. Most of all, he was done pretending to enjoy a partnership that had ceased to bring him any personal or artistic satisfaction. The professional consequences were immediate and severe. Contracts worth millions of dollars were canceled overnight. Theater bookings that had been scheduled months in advance were suddenly worthless. Both men faced financial penalties and legal challenges as their business empire collapsed around them. Industry insiders predicted that both careers were effectively over, with many believing that Lewis might survive as a solo act, but that Martin, seen as the lesser talent, would quickly fade into obscurity. Martin's response to these predictions was characteristically cool. Rather than expressing regret or attempting to mend fences with Lewis, he simply moved forward, signing a contract with Capitol Records and beginning to rebuild his career as a solo performer. His apparent indifference to the professional and financial chaos he had helped create only reinforced his reputation as someone who lived by his own rules, regardless of the consequences. The personal toll was harder to measure, but equally significant. Martin had essentially ended a 10-year relationship that had been central to his identity as a performer. The easy chemistry and natural timing that had made Martin and Lewis so special couldn't be replicated with other partners, leaving Martin to discover whether he could succeed on his own terms. More troubling was the precedent it set for how Martin would handle future conflicts. Rather than working through disagreements or finding compromises, he had chosen the nuclear option, ending the partnership with such finality that reconciliation became impossible. This pattern, building resentment in silence before delivering devastating rejection, would be repeated throughout his career as he systematically distanced himself from friends, colleagues, and eventually family members who disappointed or frustrated him. The entertainment press, initially sympathetic to both men, began to take sides as details of their breakup became public. Some columnists portrayed Martin as ungrateful, suggesting that Lewis had been the real talent in the partnership, and that Martin owed his success to his former partner's creativity and energy. These criticisms stung Martin, who had always been sensitive about his perceived intelligence and artistic contributions, but he refused to publicly defend himself or engage in the media war that Lewis seemed eager to wage. The 1960s should have been Dean Martin's golden decade, and in many ways they were. His solo career flourished beyond anyone's expectations, his Rat Pack performances became legendary, and his television variety show dominated Thursday night ratings. But behind the success, Martin was systematically destroying relationships with a cold efficiency that would have impressed a corporate downsizer. The man who had once been the most beloved figure in entertainment was revealing himself to be capable of breathtaking cruelty when crossed. The most public betrayal came within the Rat Pack itself, specifically in his treatment of Frank Sinatra during their planned 1988 reunion tour. Sinatra, struggling with his own demons and facing declining health, had organized the tour partly to help Sammy Davis Jr., who was facing severe financial difficulties despite decades of success. For Sinatra, the tour represented a chance to recapture the magic of their Vegas heyday while helping a friend in need. Martin agreed to participate, but his heart clearly wasn't in it. Still devastated by the death of his son Dean Paul in a military plane crash the previous year, Martin seemed to be going through the motions of friendship without actually feeling any connection to his former partners. During rehearsals, he was distant and unprofessional, failing to learn new arrangements and showing little interest in the nostalgic banter that Sinatra had planned. The breaking point came after just a few performances. Citing kidney problems, Martin simply walked away from the tour, leaving Sinatra and Davis to continue without him. But it wasn't the departure itself that wounded Sinatra so deeply, it was the manner of it. Martin offered no real explanation, no apology, and no acknowledgement of the impact his abandonment would have on his supposedly closest friends. He simply disappeared, as if 25 years of friendship had meant nothing to him. Sinatra, who had built his entire identity around loyalty and personal relationships, was devastated by what he perceived as the ultimate betrayal. For 2 years, the two men didn't speak, their silence representing the end of one of entertainment history's most famous friendships. When they finally reconciled shortly before Martin's death, it was too little, too late to repair the damage that had been done. Martin's treatment of his television crew was equally callous, though less publicly documented. Greg Garrison, his longtime producer, later revealed the extent to which Martin had emotionally withdrawn from his professional relationships during the final seasons of his variety show. When Martin walked through the studio door on the morning of the show, Garrison explained he didn't know what he was going to sing, what he was going to say, or who the guest stars were going to be. Garrison made it a point never to call him during the week for any reason. This wasn't the charming spontaneity that audiences loved. It was the behavior of a man who had ceased to care about the people who depended on him for their livelihoods. Martin would walk through a single rehearsal, retreat to his dressing room, and emerge only for the actual taping. His total work time on the show was calculated at just 3 hours, a professional commitment so minimal that it bordered on contempt for everyone else involved in the production. Even more devastating was his treatment of longtime friends who had supported him through his early struggles. Sammy Cahn, the lyricist who had written some of Martin's biggest hits, found himself gradually frozen out as Martin's circle of trusted associates grew smaller and smaller. Cahn had been instrumental in Martin's solo success after the Lewis breakup, but Martin's gratitude had limits, and he showed no hesitation in cutting ties when Cahn's usefulness had ended. The pattern extended to his business relationships as well. Martin's manager, Mort Viner, watched helplessly as his client systematically burned bridges with studio executives, network programmers, and industry power brokers who had helped build his career. Martin's attitude seemed to be that he had given them years of profitable service and owed them nothing beyond that contractual obligation. When those contracts ended, so did his willingness to maintain even basic professional courtesy. Perhaps most shocking was his treatment of Jerry Lewis during their brief, orchestrated reunion on Lewis's 1976 MDA telethon. Sinatra had arranged the surprise appearance, hoping to heal the 20-year rift between his two friends. The audience response was overwhelming, with phones lighting up and donations pouring in as viewers witnessed what they believed was a genuine reconciliation. But for Martin, it was just another performance. According to Lewis, while they spoke regularly after the telethon, Martin's warmth was largely superficial. When Lewis tried to arrange more meaningful contact or suggest possible projects they might work on together, Martin was politely uninterested. He had participated in the reunion for Sinatra's sake and to generate positive publicity, but he had no real desire to rebuild a friendship with the man he had once called nothing but a fucking dollar sign. The cruelest cut came in Martin's treatment of his own family members who worked in the entertainment industry. His daughter Gail, who had carved out her own singing career and often appeared on his television show, found herself gradually edged out as Martin became less interested in maintaining family connections that required effort on his part. His son Craig, who had pursued acting, discovered that his father's support came with conditions and expectations that made their relationship feel more like a business arrangement than a family bond. By 1995, Dean Martin had achieved something that would have seemed impossible during his peak years. He had become completely alone. The king of cool, who had once been surrounded by friends, colleagues, and admirers, spent his final year dining by himself every night at the same Beverly Hills restaurants, wearing the same navy pants and light blue shirt, a broken man whose famous charm had curdled into bitter isolation. The transformation was so complete that even industry veterans who had known him for decades were shocked by what he had become. William Keck, a reporter for the National Enquirer who encountered Martin regularly during these final years, described a man who bore little resemblance to the confident entertainer who had once ruled Las Vegas. He was still the nice man that he seemed to be on television, Keck recalled, but he was finished. He would eat by himself, always wearing the same outfit. He would promise that he would be back on that stage one day, but everyone knew he was done. The death of his son, Dean Paul, in 1987 had been the final blow that shattered what remained of Martin's capacity for human connection. Dean Paul, whom Martin had called his golden boy, had been perhaps the only person left in his life who could penetrate the emotional walls he had built around himself. The 35-year-old's death in a military training accident represented not just the loss of a beloved child, but the end of Martin's last meaningful relationship. Martin's grief was so profound that it seemed to drain away whatever warmth had remained in his personality. Paul Anka, who had known Martin for decades, observed that after that event in his life, things really changed, and it was a huge turning point. The man who had once charmed millions with his easy smile and casual demeanor became a shell of his former self, going through the motions of living without any apparent joy or purpose. His relationship with Frank Sinatra, which had briefly been repaired before Dean Paul's death, collapsed entirely after Martin walked out on their reunion tour. For 2 years, the two men who had once been inseparable didn't speak, each too proud to make the first move toward reconciliation. When they finally did reconnect over dinner in 1995, just months before Martin's death, the reunion was more sad than celebratory. Two old men acknowledging the end of something that had once been beautiful. Martin's health was deteriorating rapidly. A lifelong heavy smoker, he had been diagnosed with lung cancer in 1993, but refused the surgery that might have prolonged his life. His decision seemed less about medical concerns than about a fundamental loss of will to continue fighting. He had simply given up, choosing to let the disease take its course, rather than endure the treatments that might give him a few more years of the isolation that had become his life. His remaining family members found themselves shut out by his emotional withdrawal. His ex-wife, Jeanne, with whom he had reconciled in his later years, was one of the few people who could still reach him, but even she struggled to penetrate the depression that had settled over him like a heavy blanket. His surviving children tried to maintain contact, but Martin had little energy left for the kind of relationships that required emotional investment. The entertainment industry that had once celebrated him had largely moved on. The variety show format that had made him wealthy was extinct. The Rat Pack era was ancient history, and the new generation of performers had no particular interest in learning from or honoring the giants who had come before them. Martin had become a relic, preserved in reruns and tribute shows, but no longer relevant to contemporary popular culture. His days followed a rigid, joyless routine. He would wake up in his Beverly Hills home, spend the day watching television or reading newspapers, then venture out for dinner at one of a handful of familiar restaurants where the staff knew to seat him at a quiet table and leave him alone. He rarely spoke to other diners and showed no interest in the celebrities and industry figures who might be sitting nearby. On Christmas Day 1995, Dean Martin died alone in his bedroom, succumbing to acute respiratory failure brought on by the emphysema and lung cancer that had been slowly killing him for years. He was 78 years old. The irony was impossible to ignore. The man who had spent his career bringing joy to millions of people had died on the most joyful day of the year, with no one present to witness his passing. The funeral was a study in contrasts. While hundreds of industry figures and fans gathered to pay their respects, the list of people who had been genuinely close to Martin in his final years was heartbreakingly short. Jerry Lewis, with whom he had never truly reconciled despite their public reunion, sat in the back of the church, honoring a friendship that had died decades before the man himself. Frank Sinatra, devastated by the loss of his oldest friend, delivered a eulogy that acknowledged both the greatness of what they had shared and the tragedy of how it had ended. The Las Vegas Strip, which Martin had helped transform from a desert outpost into an entertainment capital, dimmed its lights in his honor, a fitting tribute to a man who had helped create modern celebrity culture but had ultimately been destroyed by its demands and contradictions. Anyway, that's it for this video, folks. Bye.